Thank you so much for sitting down and being willing to chat with us.
Certainly.
So next week, at the very end of next week, is your last day here at the city as the city attorney, and you're heading off into retirement. So we wanted to talk a little bit about how you got here, what you've learned, and sort of your wisdom for future city attorneys.
I'm good up until the wisdom part.
You're good up until the wisdom part. So let's start with like how you started after college. You went into the Navy.
Correct.
And you were a Navy pilot.
Correct.
And so that was your first sort of public service. What attracted you first to the Navy?
I went to the Naval Academy. I was looking at a couple of different private schools as well, and that opportunity came up. And at the end of the day, I felt like it was what I wanted to do at that point. I was 18 years old, so I went there. It was 4 years. Was graduated, was commissioned, and then I had the opportunity to go to flight school, and I did that. And then I became a helicopter pilot. My first regular squadron assignment was in San Diego, flying off the back end of destroyers with multiple missions in a helicopter, an H-2.
How did that inform sort of the rest of your life? That's a deep question, I recognize.
It was certainly very challenging, and actually while I was in flight school was when I got together with my wife, and then she moved with me to San Diego. Part of that was you're on duty 24/7 literally, and in some instances, certainly when you're at sea. And that was something that we sort of in our relationship grew up with, that I was going to be gone. One time it was a 6.5 month cruise. And you learn quite a bit about yourselves and each other when you're in that position. And so it was when my wife joined me in flight school in Pensacola, Florida. She was from Marion, and we thought that we would probably be coming back to Iowa only for visits. And then 10 years later, we returned to the state. 15 years later, I returned to my hometown with 2 little boys.
And your hometown is Mount Vernon.
Correct.
But you have connections to North Liberty and the state of Iowa beyond that.
My family's from northern Johnson County and southern Linn County on both my sides, and I was well aware of both my grandfather's ancestry, and as well as my maternal grandmother. And I always thought that it was on my maternal grandparents went back the farthest. They were the ancestors who were Czech immigrants in the 1870s. But after actually starting here as a full-time city attorney for North Liberty, I learned it was my maternal grandmother whose ancestors went back even further, and that was to the 1850s. A direct descendant was on what would now be considered the school board here in North Liberty, or outside of North Liberty. We think it was a farm on the west side of 380, and it's something that we're going to try to sort out a little bit more. She also ran across something where he may have been a part-time magistrate as well. And so for our family, our ties to North Liberty are pretty significant.
So after flight school, after you finished service in the
Correct.
Navy, you returned here,
Mm-hmm.
and you went to law school.
Correct.
What attracted you to law school?
It was something that growing up, that's what I thought I wanted to do, was go to law school, become a lawyer. When the opportunity came up to go to the Naval Academy and went in a pretty different direction, I pretty much had put that aside. Then there was not everything there. Can you go back to a moment? But there was a moment, in a sense, for me. And so I'm in San Diego. I'm in a helicopter squadron. We all have non-flying job responsibilities or duties. And my first assignment was as personnel officer in the administrative department. And early in that time, or that tenure, we had a personnel issue come up, and it was a little bit complicated. There were some concerns about safety for people, but also for aircraft, and I got involved, and it was assigned to me, and I just took it to a level where we ended up with a voluntary resolution with this particular individual that I think served him well, served the squadron well, protected the squadron's interests. And one of my collateral duties at that time, and it really was a crossover, was being the squadron legal officer as well. Then a few years later, my wife and I made the decision that we did want to return to Iowa, that I was not going to continue towards a 20 or 30-year career in the military. And then that's when I was looking at law school and ended up at Iowa.
You got a taste of sort of what the legal profession had
Right.
to offer while you were in the military, and that just gave you a taste. What was it about that experience that you found enjoyable, or you found that you liked doing?
It's taking on something that there's not an easy or obvious answer to, and then digging into it, and all the while trying to help the different parties that are involved with it. And I think coming out of that, it was that was my sense that it actually had accomplished something. And I think I've done a wide variety of things in with the law, but in one sense or another, it's usually about assisting people or working for the public good. If you're a city attorney or as a prosecutor.
So when you went into law school, did you think of that as the first step to a career in working for a city attorney or a county attorney's office, or did that come later?
I'm going to go back.
Okay.
When I was at the Naval Academy, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I was sure that I did want to fly, so I helped my life insurance based on the fact that I would never be flying, so I ended up flying. Fast forwarding to law school, I did not know what I wanted to do, but I was sure that I did not want to be in court, and I did not want to have anything to do with criminal law. So my first job was being a prosecutor in the Linn County Attorney's Office. So, you know, it's just hard to say where you end up, or for me anyway. It wasn't always. I didn't always end up on the path that I thought I would be, but that's what happened.
So you were a prosecutor. That was when you were out of law school. What lessons did you learn from that experience?
The role of this was with the Linn County Attorney's Office. The role certainly is important, and your client is not any one individual. The client is, in the case of a county attorney's office here in Iowa, the client is the state of Iowa. I mean, that's whose name you're acting in, obviously down to a county level. And I think there was it was certainly gratifying to, for instance, make a closing argument in the name of the state. At the same time, what I did like about it, that sometimes there were reasons to not go forward with certain prosecutions. And you had the authority within your caseload, you had the authority to say, we shouldn't go forward with this particular case, or we should come to an alternative resolution short of going to trial. And you had that authority, but I think it's also a responsibility. And I found that to be very rewarding. I think the other thing that about my experience at the county attorney's office was just being in court a lot. And certainly as a prosecutor, and then for a little over half of that time I was in the civil division, but one of my responsibilities was defending Linn County in litigation. And so the opportunity to be in court was, as an attorney, again, not necessarily thinking I wanted to do that when I started, I found that to be very, very rewarding, very gratifying.
You spent about a decade there, is that right?
Yes, 9 years.
And then you went into private practice.
Correct.
What did you miss when you went into private practice of that public service part?
I didn't know what I wanted to do in private practice, and I sort of fell back into criminal law, but on quote, the other side of the fence, unquote. And at first I was a little bit uncomfortable with that, and it wasn't really my plan, but I found myself being very professionally satisfied with representing individuals in criminal cases. And there are a number of different parts to that. But it's certainly important that individuals are represented, particularly when it's a serious charge, and that surprised me actually. And that was the main part of my private practice really until I started here. I was a city attorney on contract back in August of 2006. I continued to do criminal work, but right away when I started here, it was about a half-time job, and we went from there.
You started back as a city attorney, both for North Liberty, but you served other municipalities
Correct.
too. That became part of your private practice as
Correct.
well. How was being a city attorney different than serving as a county attorney? Either, I mean, obviously as a prosecutor, it's a different thing, but how is it different than being a county attorney?
It's probably overall fairly similar, but the setup was different. When I was in the civil division of the Linn County Attorney's Office, we had 3 full-time attorneys. So I had certain responsibilities, and for instance, I did not go on a regular basis to Board of Supervisor meetings, whereas obviously I do with the city of North Liberty and I did with other cities. My major responsibilities there were litigation. We had just become self-insured, and so that was a big part of it. Then I was representing both the planning, there's different iterations, planning, zoning, and building in Linn County, but then also the Sheriff's Department, including the jail.
What parts of being a city attorney and as a public servant in that role do you find most satisfying still?
I continue to like, and I've always liked the public aspect of being a city attorney, and it's sometimes there's some confusion about what a city attorney does do or doesn't do. When you're representing somebody in a criminal case, your responsibility is to that one person, and it's clear, it's close to being absolute. And that's what you're doing. And sometimes they're in a position that they don't, that individual doesn't have too many other people, and sometimes no other people, individuals, family, friends, professionals on his or her side. In a city, it gets a little more complicated of who's your client, and city attorneys sometimes debate that to a certain extent. But I think ultimately it is the public, and it's not the mayor, it's not the individual council members, it's not the council as a whole, it's not the city administrator. You're working for all of those people, but ultimately, again, it's for the public. It's similar to your responsibilities when you're working for a corporation or a business, and depending on the circumstances, but at least generally.
So as you look back over your career, what are things that you know now that you wish you'd known at the beginning?
I think probably the biggest thing is what I just mentioned, but it's who is the client, and I don't have all the answers. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes it's a bit convoluted. It's certainly not one individual, and I think having a better handle on that, I'm more comfortable at this point. I wish I would have been more comfortable earlier in my career, but I think it was a very gradual process. I think that's an important aspect of the city attorney's role as well.
Are there any other lessons that you wish you'd known 2 decades ago?
I guess not in terms of lessons. I certainly did not know what I know now, but I also don't know now what I wish I knew.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's a separate challenge of being a city attorney. Is you're again comparing it to representing somebody in a criminal case, but it can be a civil case too, where you have this one case, and you're all in on that, and if you don't know what it's about, you need to learn quickly. As a city attorney, you're involved in a lot of different things, and jack of all trades, master of none comes to mind. In a sense, that's what the responsibility is, and certainly I do not do all of the legal work for the city of North Liberty. And that's true of most city attorneys in Iowa. That if there are some cases that are covered under insurance, that's usually not handled by our office. There are sometimes the need for somebody who does specialize in cases of, for instance, eminent domain or condemnation. We've had the assistance of a very good attorney out of Ames here recently. And I think that's not only sometimes necessary because of, and increasingly it's necessary because of workload, but I think it's important to do that when you need the services of somebody who does specialize. And I sort of have become, over the, certainly since joining the city as an employee in 2011, more of a, I've specialized more in being a city attorney, but there are aspects of the law that I can't claim to be well versed in or have the experience that I wish I did have.
So it's a general practice in some ways, but also in a very specific sort of arena.
In the environment, correct.
Yeah. So I was originally going to ask, like, what will you miss most in retirement? But we've talked a lot about that. What are you looking forward to most in retirement?
Well, and I had an answer to that question, and was I don't know, because I don't have any experience in full-time retirement. So I expect that I'm just really not sure what it's going to be like that first workday morning. I wake up and I'm at home and I don't go in. My wife has been retired for about 7 years, and so she's has established some rules already, and is a little bit nervous about me being around full time. But I think we're going to actually be fine, and I do believe she's really looking forward to it. I've had a lot of questions. What are you going to do? And I probably have. I'm involved with maybe 4 different volunteer positions that I will continue in those. But otherwise, I'm really trying to just not take on any new commitments for at least a few months, and I've said until maybe after the first of the year, and that could change. I really don't know what's out there. Certainly, we want to travel a little bit more. We have 2 grandkids up in the Twin Cities, and that's a big deal to us. And being able to be a little more flexible in traveling there is certainly something we're looking forward to. I think there's something out there, and I just don't know what it is.
Scott, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
I look back, and there are things that I wish I would have done differently. There are things that I wish I would have done better. But overall, unless somebody dissuades me of the notion, I'd like to think that I made a contribution while I was here. When I started, it was a particularly difficult time for the city of North Liberty, and that was again in August of 2006. And that first 6 months was very challenging, and anyone who was here and followed what was going on with the city would know what was happening. And I'd like to think I got better as time went on and maybe made a bigger contribution, but I think that first 6 months was pretty significant, and looking back, I feel good about the contribution I made in a time that was pretty challenging, pretty difficult for the city.
And so just so that we can be a little bit clear, when you first started, so we had a city administrator who left, right? That was that, and we had some contention on council.
When I came down here, there was a lawsuit pending between a sitting council member and the city mayor, and the case was actually before my former boss, who was in Lynn County, Denver Diller was who I worked for, and then he became a district court judge. When the night my appointment was considered by council, there was tension over that, and I remember coming down for the meeting and not expecting that, and yet there was. I was warned when I walked in that my appointment may or may not happen, and if I remember right, it was agenda item number 13, and it took a while to get to the agenda because of other issues. But there was a lot of tension for amongst the elected officials, but then also staff, and then certainly the community. And it was just a tough time.
Yeah,
It was a tough time.
Yeah, I mean, North Liberty's seen a lot of change. Obviously, you know, we've had a lot of growth, and I think back to sort of, you know, 2006, 2007, 2008, and really those 2000s being. There's a lot of tension with sort of this explosive growth, and what kind of a city were we going to become?
Right. At the meeting that I was appointed, again, having been warned that in advance that my appointment may or may not happen, when I came down to North Liberty thinking it was a fairly routine agenda item. But the one memory I have of that is that there was and I think there was unhappiness. Again, there were sides, but there was unhappiness with the process, and that led to my selection, at least to be put before the council for approval. And the one person who seemed to stand above the fray, and that was Tom Salm. And there was a motion to table my appointment, and I've been warned it may not happen. And Tom seconded that motion, and at the time I didn't know him at all, and I didn't know right when he seconded it what his motivation might have been. But then he explained himself. He said, we have a council member that's concerned about the process, something to this effect, but concerned about the process, and I think it's appropriate. And again, whatever his words were, that we consider that. Well, then the or the motion to table was voted down, and then they went on, and I think my appointment as city attorney was approved 4-1. But I was struck with Tom Salm's role in this environment, and really through that next the following 6 months, how important his voice was, and the contribution he made in his role as a council member. Then obviously later as a mayor will be something I'll remember.
Scott, thank you so much for sitting
Sure.
down. And you know, we're celebrating tonight, and but good luck in retirement. I'll just say that now.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Scott.
All right. Thank you, Nick.